What's the practical difference of living a life predicated on the belief in a one and only God? So much of what we do, practice, and believe in Judaism is based on a belief in a God, in a monotheistic God we can't experience with any of the senses. And yet, we often ask ourselves or wonder, what difference does it really make? How am I living my life any differently because of that belief? I think this is a very important question to raise in this week's Torah reading, because in Parsha Lech Lecha, in this week's Torah reading, Abraham discovers God, and Abraham founds Judaism. He establishes Judaism on the basis of the belief in a one and only God. But we know that Abraham is also known for something else. Abraham is known not only for being the first person to preach the belief in a one and only God, but also as being the greatest promoter of chesed, of kindness. And I often wondered why those two character traits of Abraham had to be portrayed in the same being. Why couldn't we have one figure, one biblical personality teaching us the belief in a one God, could have been Abraham, and somebody else teaching us the importance of chesed, of being kind to other people? Why are they wrapped up, both of these things, in the same person, Abraham? And I think the answer is very simple, but very, very fundamental to Judaism. What's the practical significance of believing in a one and only God? And that, of course, is the way we treat our fellow human being. If you believe in a God, and in a God that creates people, and creates those people in His own image, B'Tselem Elokim, as the Torah says, in God's own image, then the way we treat other human beings is on a much higher level. And the whole concept of chesed, which Judaism brought to the world, becomes something predicated on our most fundamental belief in a monotheistic God. The practical difference of living a life of belief, of faith in one God, is the way we treat each other. It's a very beautiful story told of this Hasidic master who had a reputation for coming late to synagogue. And some of his more devoted disciples would defend their teacher, explaining to the others that the reason their Rebbe comes late to shul is because he is communing with God Himself before he gets there. And there was one skeptic who didn't quite buy it, and he decided that he would spy out the Rebbe. And he crouched behind a bush outside of the Rebbe's house early in the morning, at dawn, and the door of the Rebbe opened. And he began to follow the Rebbe into the forest. And it was strange, the Rebbe was not dressed like he normally was when we would come to synagogue in his rabbinic garb, but he was dressed like a lumberjack. And the cynic follows the Rebbe into the woods, into the forest. He sees him chopping down a couple of branches and twigs, puts them in a bag, and has this other bag filled with groceries, and walks for another about half a mile deep into the woods until finally he comes across this log cabin. The cynic watches the Rebbe go inside the log cabin and approaches this elderly woman, who he begins to build a fire with the branches that he'd cut down, and starts making her breakfast from the groceries that he had bought for her. And the Rebbe spends a few minutes there. The cynic is watching all of this from a distance. And then, of course, the Rebbe leaves, goes back home, gets dressed for synagogue, and comes late for shul. The cynic approaches the Hasidim, the disciples, the students of the Rebbe, and he says to them, you know how you've been defending your teacher, saying that the reason he comes late to synagogue is because before he is going to the heavens to commune with God Himself. He says, you're wrong. He goes much higher than that. Being able to give and to offer ourselves up, performing acts of kindness, particularly for those less fortunate, is the ultimate expression of our belief in a one and only God, which is the reason why next week's Torah reading, Abraham will interrupt a conversation, a prophecy, a revelation from the Almighty to go and tend to 3 strangers, to bring them in, to give them some food, because the ultimate representation of our belief in one Hashem is the way we treat others who were created in the image of Hashem. Something to reflect upon when thinking about Abraham, the founder of Judaism, being the believer and the promoter of God and also of kindness. Shabbat Shalom.